Neil, thank you for that. It's always such a pleasure to do anything with you. Let's make it smooth and easy and pleasant. I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully that will all go smoothly. If you could just let me know that that's working fine.
I can see that fine, Lorna, yeah.
That's great, thank you, Neil. So as Neil said, my name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. What I thought I would do today is talk a little bit about the service. We're slightly different from a lot of local authority archives in that we cover such a big geographical area. So talk a little bit about the service, a little bit about what we do, the offices, the collections that are held across the offices, and then do a little bit of a focus on some of the highlights to be found in each of the 4 centres, so that you know a little bit more about what we hold. To put it into context, I wanted to start by saying a little bit about who we are and where we've come from, because when I go on to show what the service is now, I think it's interesting to see it as the journey and the evolution of the service. So this was our archive search room when the Highland Regional Council established a record office in 1990. I'm sure you're aware, if you have been involved with Historic Environment Scotland Archives, Scotland has a long tradition of archive keeping, and the National Records of Scotland in Edinburgh is one of the oldest purpose-built archive centres in the world. But that all happened in the 1700s and 1800s, but when it came to regional offices for archives, it was a lot later than that. And it wasn't until 1990 that the Highland Regional Council established a record office for the Highlands. And from 1992, that service was based in Inverness Library. And the picture you can see there shows the amount of space that we had. So you can see there that there are 2 tables for readers with those 4 seats. I'm assuming 4 people can sit there until a map comes out, and then that's limiting it a little bit. And on the left-hand side of the picture, you can see the desk where the archive assistant would have sat. The other thing you can see in that picture is that the collections are held there in that room, but a lot of them weren't. So some were held in that room, but others were held in satellite stores around the Highlands. In 1995, to better serve this population, Caithness Archive Centre opened in Wick. And then in 2008, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William. In 2009, Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre in Portree. And then in 2009 as well, the central collections moved out of Inverness Library and into the purpose-built Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. So this is the resulting facilities that we have now to serve the Highland population. On the top left-hand side, you can see the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. That's where I'm usually based. The terracotta section of that is where the records are housed. So that building has about 6 miles or 9 kilometres of shelving for the archives in it. That building holds the overarching records for the Highlands, and also records particular to Inverness-shire, Ross and Cromarty, Sutherland and Nairnshire. On the top right-hand side, that's Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. That building opened in 2017. It houses the historic records for the county of Caithness, but also going forward is in the process of looking after all the nuclear records for Great Britain. Down on the bottom left-hand side, you can see Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, which holds the records discrete to Lochaber. And then on the bottom right, Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre, which holds the records discrete to Skye and Lochalsh. But overall, the 4 of them come under the Highland Archive Service banner. We are a local authority archive, so we all hold records produced by the Highland Council and the predecessors of the Highland Council. But in addition to that, we're also a collecting archive service. So all of these 4 buildings house business records, family and estate papers. We hold the records of the Highland Health Board, Northern Constabulary, and so on. And I'll come on to talk more about that in a second. So you can see from that first building, that first photo of that one room, this is the facility that we have now for the public to access the records. All 4 of our archive centres, and we're very fortunate in this, and I'm well aware we're very fortunate in this, all 4 of them have archive strong rooms, purpose-built to ensure that the documents are kept in the best conditions, so they're temperature controlled and they're secure. They also all have search rooms that allow public access to the records and regular opening hours. I was saying to Neil when we spoke a couple of days ago that it used to be, we used to be really proud of the fact that people didn't need to make an appointment, but of course COVID has thrown that a little bit out of the window. But nevertheless, it remains that we have space that people can come in and access these records. So this is the area of the Highlands of Scotland, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar from it. I was seeing in the comments people who are watching from Inverness and Alness and different places. So you can see it's a big geographical area. The Highlands covers a third of the landmass of Scotland, and that's why we have these 4 centres. The mission statement of the service is to preserve, conserve and make accessible archive collections for the whole of the Highlands. We provide access to documentary resources over 700 years, so our oldest document is from 1299, and they come right up to the present day. We have a dedicated family history centre. We offer a one-to-one consultation service, a specialist conservation studio for preparing documents, and a programme of events that we run throughout the year, and I'll touch more on each of those points just in a second. We also manage and develop from within the Highland Archive Service the Ambala digital archive, and I'll talk a little bit more about Ambala at the end, but if you're not familiar with it and you have an interest in the Highlands, then I would suggest you have a wee look at it when we're finished, because it's quite amazing the material that's on there. And just to put this into perspective a little bit again from that first photo of us in one room, in 2020-21 our electronic engagements for the year were 1.6 million. So as well as people coming into our search rooms, which of course they couldn't really in that time period, but that's the extent of the digital engagement that we do as well. So we offer family history consultation services. So we do that in face-to-face and also online. So you can see there some images of people who've come in to speak to Anne, our family historian, but we also offer those on Zoom, on Teams and other platforms. I mentioned that we have a conservation service. So this is Richard and Carrie, our 2 conservators. Again, we're very fortunate to have full-time permanent conservators. And this is the only conservation studio in the north of Scotland. So it allows us to look after our documents, but also to undertake commercial work for external bodies and individuals. We have a really broad outreach programme, and Neil touched on some of that in the introduction. We work with students, with schools, with care homes, with HMP Inverness, anything that connects people to the collections that we look after. Particularly, it's important to me that that connection is meaningful. So I can talk more at the end if people are interested in those collaborations with care homes and prisons and why they're so very important to me to do. As I said, we run schools activities, but also because we're part of High Life Highland, which is an arm's length organisation of the council, we run summer activities, so part of their Schools Out programme. There are thousands of activities that run through the summer for children in the Highlands, and we take part in those as well, bringing archives to children in less of a learning way and more of a fun way. And then one of the things that's been particularly important to us over the last couple of years, of course, is the increase in our digital engagement. So we now offer online classes. We used to previously only do them face-to-face. We run family history classes for beginners and intermediate. And also we run classes teaching people how to access archives and what sort of material there might be in them. We've been doing blogs on our websites. We've been doing online exhibitions. And then, of course, Learn with Lorna, as Neil was saying in the introduction there, and I'll tell you some more about that in a second. I'll come on and tell you a little bit about the collections and the sort of things we have, but just I'm seeing some questions coming up and I will tackle them at the end, but just as a general quick answer to some of that, Highland local government area does not cover Western Isles or Shetland and Orkney. So I'll come back and answer that more at the end, but I'm just seeing the question coming in there. Okay, so we have a variety of records that are held in every one of our offices. So we hold census records in each office and old parish registers. I'm sure some of you will have started or done a huge amount of research into your family tree. And these are your building block documents for family history research. So census, of course, telling you about people who lived at the household makeup of a household. So any particular house, the members of that household, their occupation, where they were born, and so on. So we have copies of those for the Highlands. The bottom image you can see there is an old parish register. And again, we have copies of those that survive for the Highlands. And as is the case everywhere, that really varies for across the area we look after. So for Inverness, for instance, they start in the 1600s. For Skye, they start in the 1800s, because that's just what survived. So there's a real variation across that, across the geographical area. All of our office hold valuation rolls and maps. Valuation rolls are an incredibly useful resource. They were published from the mid-1800s through to the 1980s, published annually, so they can fill in the gaps between census years, which of course were published every 10 years as a snapshot of the population. The valuation rolls published annually list every occupied property with a description of the sort of property it is. So you can see there perhaps house and garden, or a smithy, lodging house. And then the next column saying where it's situated within the area, and then the proprietor, the tenant, and the occupier, and an idea of the value. This is a classic document which was not produced for the purpose that we now use it for. This was produced as part of a rates paying system to get an idea of the values of properties, but it is now one of the most commonly used resources that we hold in our centres. People use them to, as I say, fill in those gaps between census years to find out where family members are, but also frequently people come into all of our centres to find out the history of a building, the history of their house, or another building they're interested in, and valuation rolls are absolutely crucial to that. And they are particular to Scotland, I believe, so they don't have an equivalent of this in England as far as I'm aware. On the bottom there you can see maps, and again all of our offices hold maps. These two examples here are the first edition and the second edition Ordnance Survey map for Sutherland, sheet 103, showing Golspie. The first edition maps were published in the mid to late 1800s, the second editions in the early 1900s. And using these, you can see they're side by side, and you can see some of the changes that have happened in that area over the course of that period of time. Particularly useful for the likes of Inverness. You can see huge development happening between the different series of Ordnance Survey maps. And of course, apart from Roy's military map in the 1700s, which wasn't quite comprehensive, these Ordnance Survey maps were the first time that the country had been fully mapped. So they're incredibly useful for seeing the development of an area, seeing population springing up due to industry, things like that. And also, I just know a lot of people just love a map. All of our archive centres hold school records because we're a local authority archive. So the records produced by the Highland Council or the people who came before the Highland Council automatically come to us. So the examples you can see here are a admission register on the left-hand side and a school logbook on the right-hand side. School admission registers are again often useful for family historians, but also just for context of a place. And you can see there that they give the name of the date of admission to the school, the name of the child, the name of the parent or guardian, the address. In places such as Embo, as you can see there, it's not filled out because it will just be everybody lived in Embo in Sutherland. So there's not necessarily a huge amount more detail there. The picture on the bottom picture there is the other half of that page. It's spread across wide. And so that will give you the child's date of birth, if they came from a previous school or they go on to another school, and the date of leaving. So a very useful resource if you're trying to work out things such as a parent's name, or particularly that column where it shows a student leaving and going somewhere else or coming from somewhere might just give you a pointer to somewhere else to follow that path. So useful records. School admission registers are closed for 100 years. They have a 100-year closure period on them, which means we can currently see up to 1922. And the reason for that is that there is a lot of personal information in there. So there's the child's name, the parent's name, the address, the date of birth. All of that is to protect people who may still be alive. On the right-hand side is an example of a school logbook. We have about 700 school logbooks across the Archive Service. And these are diaries that were written by the head teachers, usually once a week, to record what was happening in the school. There were some recorded prior to 1872, which was the Education Scotland Act, but really it's 1872 onwards that these become very much more standardised. That particular entry there is from Merkinch School in Inverness, and it describes a moment in April 1918 where the American Navy have set up next to the school. And it says the vast preparations made by the American naval authorities in the fields adjoining the school have now almost been completed. What was formerly the school garden has been turned into a large railway siding, and the whole district between the school and the canal has been enclosed with a large barbed wire fence, the whole guarded by sentries. Some trouble was experienced at first by the close proximity of this work, but the children have got accustomed to the large number of American sailors and no trouble is now experienced. So something you might think might not contain a huge amount of global information. It's a school logbook of one school in Inverness, but it gives an insight into the way the First World War impacted that area of the Highlands. So you can gain a huge amount of information in logbooks. Logbooks don't often mention individual pupils. If they do, it tends to be because they were either very good or very bad. So there's not frequently mentions of individual names, and so those are closed for 50 years instead. This is an example of a poor relief register, and I've seen someone in the chat saying that they were from Applecross. So this is an example from Applecross Parish Council. This is the General Register of the Poor from 1903. We hold poor relief records in several of our offices. Again, it really depends what has survived, which is a constant battle that we have in archives. But generally we have a variety of records to do with this poor relief system. We will have application registers, so that's people applying for assistance. That might be because they have because they're elderly, or because they've injured themselves, or because possibly if they're a single mother. Anything that means they are not able to work and on their own money means that they're dependent on applying to this parochial board system for help. And each parish would have a parochial board who would administer who was able to get assistance. And so you can see there the pictures, the picture on the left shows some of the applications for relief. So that was the first stage, to apply to the parochial board for assistance. If you were accepted onto that, and there might be minutes relating to that discussion as to whether you could be admitted or not. And if you were accepted on, then you'd be added onto the General Register of the Poor for that parish. And this is an example of the General Register of the Poor for the parish of Applecross. This is an entry for Flora Mackenzie of Dorney in Ardshieldog. And it says that she's 28 years old. And it says that her only method of earning any money is gathering whelks on the shore. And when I was over at Applecross Primary School a couple of years ago now, when the world was still normal. And I had spoken to the teacher and the pupils at Applecross Primary, and the teacher was telling me about taking kids onto the foreshore and looking at whelks and things. But the reason that this particular lady has been in the position of having to ask for assistance from the parish council parochial board is because it says she is partially disabled because she's burdened with a young child and she's single. So you can find information in here about individuals, about family members, but also it's really interesting series of records just to get an idea of the birth and development of the welfare state. This process came about in the 1830s when the church gave up the control of administering poor relief, and it went into being a state organised system. All of our offices hold records that were generated by the Northern Constabulary, now Police Scotland. These include examples such as this. This one is a personal record book for Constable William MacDonald. It says that he's 28 years old, that he has blue eyes and a fresh complexion, that he's a native Inverness-shire, and it gives his height, his hair colour, his eye colour, and so on. In each page of this volume, for each serving member of the force, you will get any disciplinary action. So you can see there that he was reduced to a first-class constable as a result of family quarrels and carrying firearms when on duty. And on the other side of the page, you'll get references to any meritorious acts and things that they've done that bring commendation or promotion. There are a range of different records within that Northern Constabulary collection. As I say, this is an example of a staffing record, but there are also Chief Constable's annual reports. There are detention books. There's one example in Nucleus in the Caithness Archives of a volume of listing juvenile boys who have been whipped as a punishment. But probably the most common thing in that collection and the most commonly used are the police daily occurrence books. And these are written each day by the police constable or the sergeant in each station, much like the school logbooks, and they're recording what they do. And you get all sorts of interesting information and stories in there. I found one the other day with someone, the whole police force are investigating, and the whole police in that area were investigating the theft of a pigeon. And then it turned out that there was a cat found with pigeon feathers, so they thought that they had found the culprit. But it really gives you an idea of what they're dealing with, and also the sheer number of hours and distances that the police officers were travelling. So those are some that are held right across all of our offices, and you can contact any of them and say what you're interested in, and they'll be able to tell you what they have. But I wanted to focus a little bit on each one of the centres to show the collections that are specific to that building. So if we start at the Highland Archive Centre, which is the hub of the hub and spokes model, we hold the Highland Health Board records here, and this is one of our most commonly used collections, and it contains an extraordinary range of information. So these two images here are from the Highland Health Board records that we hold on behalf of NHS Highland, but these are specific to the Highlands and Islands Medical Service. So in 1910, there was a National Insurance Act passed, which provided people with insurance against illness. But it was quickly discovered that crofters and cotters weren't covered by this act, and therefore huge swathes of the Highland population weren't getting the support that they needed in this situation. And as a result of this, Sir John Dewar of whisky fame, who you can see in that picture seated on the left-hand side, he was commissioned to take this committee around the Highlands. They interviewed people right across the Highlands and Islands and spoke to them about their health, their diet, what their experiences have been of healthcare, did they have a doctor nearby, and so on. They also spoke to doctors, to nurses, to midwives. And this is a huge, huge volume of evidence that we hold. And the result of this extraordinary committee, the Dewar Commission, was the report that you can see on the left-hand side. And it was written detailing the evidence that they had gathered on this tour. And it was so shocking and so hard-hitting when it was published that very, very quickly the Highlands and Islands Medical Service was established. And this was established to support doctors to have a salary, to enable the disparate and widespread communities of the Highlands to all have access to medical treatment. It was the first state-sponsored healthcare system in the world and is believed to be the forerunner for the NHS. So something extraordinary that the Highlands has in its story. Also within the Highland Health Board records are the records of Craigdenane, or what was originally known as Inverness District Lunatic Asylum. Now, Inverness District Lunatic Asylum was the third lunatic asylum to open in the country. It was opened in 1864. And when it opened, it immediately served a purpose that there had been no format to deal with before. So prior to this building opening, if people had mental health issues, they would either be held in the court system, so they would be put in prison because people just didn't know what else to do with them, or they would be sent to the Central Belt, sent to Musselburgh, Aberdeen maybe, to be held in an asylum there. So the building of Craigdenane, as it became known, Inverness Asylum in 1864, was a huge turning point, again in that story of welfare and care in the Highlands. We have a huge and comprehensive collection for this institution. We have the warrants that give details of why each person was thought to be in need of commitment, with the signatures of sheriffs or doctors. We have the registers of lunatics, as they were called. These are the big volumes, the admission registers that detail every person who's been taken into the asylum and why. Registers of discharge and removal, but key for getting the stories out are the case books. And these detail each patient's experiences and treatments while they were in. And if you take nothing else away from what I've said today, feel free to forget everything I've said. But one thing I would love to share with people is the fact that this place was not the image we have in our head, maybe, of what a historic asylum would be. It is, I think, the definition of that original meaning of the word asylum, of safety. They had a focus on occupational therapy. They had a focus on people being given roles, whether that was in the farm or the laundry or the kitchen. And also they had a focus on social integration. So right from its earliest days, it had an orchestra, it had dances every weekend, it had a football team, and so on. And I just think it's an important collection. I use it a lot in different events with mental health groups, with school pupils, to just open a conversation about mental health treatment and the story of that, and why some aspects of that have changed and some aspects haven't changed at all. I mentioned that we have family and estate and business collections in all of our archives, and these are just 3 random examples that I picked from the Highland Archive Centre. On the left-hand side is a document from our Alexander Fraser Timber Merchants collection, and it is a document written in 1804, and it's an order signed by Thomas Telford for timber to build the Caledonian Canal. It's a great collection, Fraser Timber Merchants. There's all sorts of things in it. The middle one is an extract from an HM Customs and Excise book. We have a big Customs and Excise collection, and it talks about all the boats and ships that were registered at Inverness and came in. And for each one you can find its name, and they have all sorts of amazing sort of romantic, wild sounding names. But it describes the ships that come in, what their tonnage is, what their captain's name is, and what their fate is. There's all sorts of stories in there as well. On the right hand side, that's a picture, as it says, of a train crossing over Culloden Moor Viaduct. And it's a picture that whenever we share it anywhere, people always love to see it. People love a steam train. But it's from a huge, huge collection of documents gathered by one person about the railways in the Highlands. These are 2 very different examples of the sort of family papers we might hold. Starting on the right-hand side, that's a Munro of Fowles charter from 1542, unusual in the number of seals that it has on it, with all the people whose names would have been on those long strips of the skin, signing their name and then adhering their seal onto the end of it. The Munro of Fowles collection was one that was returned to the Highlands when the new building was built. It had been held in the National Records of Scotland, and then when the building was built, the family returned it from Edinburgh to the Highlands because we had a building to be able to look after it. So that's one example from a big landed family, a charter from a collection of hundreds and hundreds of charters. But on the left-hand side is something equally important to us. This is an entry from the diary of Malcolm Blaine. Malcolm Blaine was a child. We have 7 of his diaries from the age of about 7 to 11, and he lived down in the south coast. He lives in Broadstairs in Kent, but came to Nairn on holiday every year. And he was a voracious learner and diary writer. He's constantly updating his diary, writing stories, drawing maps, writing coded languages. You can see there his drawing of the Muddy Firth. He loved trains, so he writes a lot about the journeys on trains across the country. But I use that a lot with children in school lessons because we don't have many voices of children in the collections. We have some, but not a huge amount. And Malcolm is so kind of vivid and bright and colourful and full of life and excitement. But Malcolm died in the First World War. He was in his early 20s. And it's a very good document for me to be able to use with children because they've grown to know Malcolm, they've grown to love him, and then they understand that he died and that he died young. And I think that's a very powerful way of explaining to people what those millions of people who died represent, because none of us can really get our head around hundreds and millions of people dying, but we can get our head around one person that we've got to know. And so it's a useful document for me to use. On the bottom there's a letter by John Abbes to William Bailey of India. And it's another one that just is a snapshot of a global moment. It says, the spirit of emigration to America still continues in the Highlands and is daily spreading and gaining strength. Many hundreds are going over this year from the Aird, Urquhart, Glenmorrison, Glengarry, Kintail and other parts, besides many in the south. So it's just a snapshot moment of that mass emigration from the Highlands to the Americas. And also that letter continues to say, I don't know why so many people are going, because all is not well on the continent, and where the war is being fought, there's the wars of independence, and so people are at risk. And of course, that was exactly what was happening at that time. Moving on to Lochaber Archive Centre, which is definitely the one with the nicest view. This is in Fort William. And one of the collections that we hold there, which is always of great interest to people, is the West Highland Museum Papers collection. The West Highland Museum is in Fort William. They hold their objects and we look after their archival collections for them. But what I love about this document in particular is it's a letter from Colonel Brain, the first governor of the Fort of Inverlochy, to the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell, from 1654. And I absolutely love it because Oliver Cromwell is one of those names you hear about when you're a child, and then to suddenly be privileged enough to have a job where I get to handle this and look at it and have that real tangible connection to that time is such a privilege. And so this is a letter from the Fort of Inverlochy writing to the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell, asking for supplies, asking for the men of war that are needed to be adequately supplied and for there to be enough food and so on, so that they don't have to go to London to get it. This is another example from the West Highland Museum Papers. This is lists of prisoners taken at Leith, Musselburgh and other locations after the Jacobite Rising of 1715. The Jacobite Risings are something I talk about a lot because, of course, they're something that has shaped the country and maybe especially the Highlands. And to have a list of names from 1715 that lists all of those who were taken prisoner, where they were taken prisoner. I don't know how well you can read that, but it says there that some were taken by the man of war, some were taken at Liberton Kirk, some were taken at the castle, and so on. So there's a huge amount of information within that. And as I say, just such a turning point moment in Highland history. One of our other most heavily used collections in Lochaber is the Cameron's Lochiel Papers. This is another example of a big landed family, still very much present today and important in the area. And this collection goes from the 1700s again through to the 2000s. And this is a great document. This is an example of a Jacobite cipher or a Jacobite code. So on the left-hand side, there are two different ones, sorry, both the images are two different codes used by the Jacobites to write to each other in secret code so that they couldn't be held up for saying something. So you can see there the House of Commons, so it says here the House of Lords is Mr. Crammond, the House of Commons is Mr. Crammond's wife, It describes the Highlands as Mr. Morrison and Inverness as Mr. Morrison's eldest daughter. And so it's quite an extraordinary document to have survived, because to be found in possession of this would be very dangerous. From that same period of the Jacobite Risings, the Camerons of Lochiel came out very strongly in support of the Jacobites. And this is a letter from the 1715 Rising, which is written by the Earl of Mar, who was in command of the forces in the north, writing to Lochiel about the Jacobite army. And he says, our rightful and natural King James VIII, which of course he never was King James VIII, but that was what the Jacobites called him, because that's what he would have been called if he'd taken the throne. By the grace of God, who is now coming to relieve us from our oppression, having been pleased to entrust me with the direction of his affairs and the command of his forces in this his ancient kingdom of Scotland. And it goes on to say that he's met with a group of people, various clan chiefs and so on, and saying that everyone needs to come out in support of the Jacobite cause at this time. The final sentence, it says that all the faithful and loving subjects and lovers of this country should with all possible speed get themselves into arms. Also from the Lochiel collection, and again reinforcing that Jacobite connection that the family had, this is a letter by Prince James Edward Stewart, who was the old pretender, the old chevalier, the father of Bonnie Prince Charlie. This is written from Rome to Lochiel, directing him to remain in France and mentioning Alan Cameron, who was at that time in Rome. But again, like that Oliver Cromwell document, it was just a huge privilege for us to have these, handle them and work with documents from these figures in history. Finally, from the Lochiel collection, just because it's very different and I wanted to share it, this is a letter written by Donald Cameron of Lochiel to his wife Hermione Cameron, and it describes the death of Donald's brother Alan in 1914. Alan Cameron had gone very early to France. He served with the British Expeditionary Forces and was very quickly killed at the beginning of the First World War. And this is a letter written by his brother to his wife saying, did you see the evening news last night? There was a report published that Alan was only wounded at Versailles. It was repeated in the Daily Mail this morning. I got on to Brewer at once and also to Ralph Campbell and to the War Office, but I fear it's unfounded and certainly unauthorised. They have telegraphed Versailles for particulars, but it gives us very little hope. And then he goes on, it is most cruel that this should have happened. And it's most cruel if it's not true. Poor Hester, that's Alan's wife. I hope she doesn't see the newspapers because it's wicked to raise false hopes. And if we have time at the end, I can maybe talk a little bit. I have an event coming up with Professor Dame Sue Black, and this was a letter we spoke about because she was saying one of the things that she struggles most with in her work as a forensic pathologist is when families are given false hope and the pressure that that puts on a family when it doesn't come true. And I just thought this was a very striking and emotional letter from the First World War. So we've got 2 left to do. So this is Skye and Loch Archive Centre in Portree, a great location for us. It's situated on the Elgin Hostel campus, which means that we are right next to the high school, next to the swimming pool, the library, and all of those places that people are sort of in and out of all the time in the community. One of the most loved collections in Skye and Loch, and if you follow them on Facebook, you'll be familiar with this collection, I'm sure, is the Duncan McPherson collection. Duncan McPherson was a pharmacist in Kyle of Loch and also a very keen and able photographer. You can see him there on the right-hand side and his shop on the left-hand side. The 2 children in the middle, great photo of the wee boy with the hat on, that's his children. And Duncan McPherson, of course, was at the centre of the community because he was a pharmacist, but also he wrote publications, particularly assisting people to visit Skye and Loch. So there were guidebooks and tourist information and so on. And so the Duncan McPherson collection, which comprises hundreds of photographs, is one of the most loved collections that's held at Skye and Loch. This is another part of the collection. So those first ones were all to do with the family. This second collection all to do with local events, and local community and so on. So you can see there the gathering on the left-hand side with the Navy in it. Really striking photos. We have a lot of estate collections, and these are very, very useful for people who have a family member who worked on an estate and they want to find out more about that. Also incredibly useful for social history. So this is the Waternish Estate Collection, and this shows the rentals in Ardmore in 1831 to 33. So you can see there the names of the tenants and what their rent is. But particularly interesting, this collection, we're coming up in a couple of months to the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Braes in Skye, and there's information to be found in these estate collections about the way in which the land was managed, people were moved from place to place, and the effect and impact that that had on them. The Waternish Estate Collection also has, like the Duncan McPherson collection, some fantastic photos in it. So you can see here that lady on the right hand side sitting in the door of her cottage, and then on the left hand side estate workers working at the hay. So great for social history and an idea of what's happening in an area. And then Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. This was built by and is administered by the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, and High Life Highland and the Highland Archive Service run the public facing service on behalf of them, giving access to the historic records of Caithness. So you can see it's an entirely different sort of building from the others. Again, like all the others, Nucleus will hold school records and maps and so on, but some particular collections that are specific to the area. One of those is the records of Wick Harbour, and all of these images come from that, and it's a fantastic collection. All sorts of stories about something that was, of course, so central to the way Wick operated, the harbour for so many generations, the very centre of what happened in the area. And so you can find information here about trawler riots or about the grain riots that hit Wick in the 1800s. We have a big architects collection in Nucleus, the Sinclair MacDonald collection, and you can see there the range of buildings covered by this architect's practice. So on the left, the Castle of May, or Barrigal Castle as it was, and then on the right hand side, the nuclear housing that was set up and built in Thurso when Dounreay was opened. And then finally, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Ambala, because if you are not familiar with it, it may well be something that's of interest to you. So ambala.org.uk, the words mean the village in Gaelic, and that is our Highland History and Culture website. And Ambala has collections from the Highland Archive Service collections, but also from individuals, private museums, all sorts of different areas, different organisations. These are some of the pictures that are on there. You can see fantastic Gordon Shannon collection of Highland travellers, such as the man playing his fiddle there, or the picture of Cromarty in 1910, which seems like it belongs much longer ago than 1910. The pictures at the bottom are called the Snow Kids. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see the three children and the snowballs being put on the poor girl's head. Now, that photo was taken in 1950, and when Ambala was set up, these pictures were donated and they didn't know any details about it at all. And so there was a press appeal, and these photos went out, that photo went out into the Inverness Courier and other places, and they were able to reunite the three people in the photo in 2003 who hadn't seen each other since it was taken. So there is also a powerful ability for these things to generate contact and meaningful relationship. So there are all our social media pages. If you want to find us on Facebook or Twitter or any of those things, you can do so. If you want to contact us with regards to research, or we can undertake commission research for people, then by all means, please do get in touch with us and we'll be able to advise about that. But I'll stop sharing my screen, Neil, and come back to you.